normally in Dutch, but the idea is the same. You are from Vers Beton, a magazine for the hard-thinking Rotterdammer. Hard work, yeah. Vers Beton, you are posing a question to a scientist of Erasmus University. The question is kind of related to the American elections, but also related to always, Rotterdam, an issue from Rotterdam. Can you introduce the mini lecture by Rogier?
Well, immigration is a big subject in the American elections right now, but not alone in America, also in Europe and in the big cities. So also in Rotterdam, and the question we wanted to ask Rogier is how much immigrants can Rotterdam accommodate? And is there such a thing that you can measure this? Is it maybe even the right question? And how do we cope with fear for newcomers and immigrants, and how do we deal with that?
So. Something we see in the United States as well, and what can we do different than, for example, building an enormous wall between the US and Mexico, or sending away Muslim immigrants, for example. So how should we cope with the sentiment that is obviously present? Okay, for that we will turn to a sociologist, and he just received a Venny grant, prestigious Venny grant, for doing research exactly on this theme. Please welcome Dr. Rogier van Reekum.
Yeah, thanks. So I got this question, and as a sociologist, when you receive a question outside of your own like scientific debates, you always have to make sure that it's really a question that is it the right question. And a lot of work that sociologists actually do is to think about the questions that are circulating in society, and then to kind of try to rephrase them and reform them in such a way that actually you can do proper scientific research about them, and then produce knowledge that we can actually use. So that's what I was thinking about, and what I want to talk about. So in the summer of 2015, the European Commission declared that there was a refugee crisis going on. You all remember this. Suddenly you saw this on your TV screens. There is a refugee crisis. And that term ratified effectively what was already happening, and what in a sense had already happened, namely that the system for dealing with unwanted migration, that is to arrest, detain and deport people, had totally collapsed in the summer of 2015. And it was not just that the system was incapable of processing large amounts of people. This had been the case for many years already. No, now the collaboration between the European member states had also broken down. And above all, people took this opportunity to travel on from areas around Europe, but also from the southern regions, to countries in which people imagined a better life possible. And instead of admitting that the migration regime, which had been built from the 1980s onward, had completely failed, political leaders chose to hide this failure by renaming a horrible series of events, including thousands of border deaths. And they said, this isn't the failure of European migration politics that you are all witnessing. No, it is a refugee crisis. And with this term, Europeans could kind of regain a sense of nobility. We could say, yeah, we are coming to the aid, to the rescue of people in need, real refugees. And then precisely by talking about an emergency situation, mainly associated, by the way, with refugees from Syria, the basic structure of the migration regime, again, to arrest people, to detain them, and then to deport them, didn't have to be questioned. This was, after all, an exceptional situation. And so Europe eventually came around and accepted a small part of the people looking for a better life in Africa and the Middle East, but only after smugglers had been paid and the risk of death had been waged. So this, I would say, is the infamous welcome culture in which we, also in Rotterdam, receive refugees. And seen in this way, I would say the question about how many people Rotterdam can cope with turns out to be part, actually, of the crisis rhetoric. Because apparently refugees are not really part of our world. They are a kind of extra burden which cannot or should not exceed our support capacity, or in Dutch, it's a fantastic word, we need draagvlak. Oh, if we don't have draagvlak, the world will crumble. The problem that was named the refugee crisis is added in a way to our own problems. Hence the question, how much of it can we handle? And only when people arrive here does that question arise. So the conditions that create and impact people on the move as they seek another life are apparently not inside the same world as that in which Rotterdam and our problems exist. So we are thereby living in this kind of social fantasy in which migrating people are not already, as they are moving around and looking for another life, our problem. So borders aren't just material structures like detention centers and fences, but they are also imaginary structures by which we try to cut up the world. So in fact, Rotterdam is a very important example here because the entire world actually flows through this city in the form of oil and resources and money and knowledge and culture and increasing amounts of tourists. But when people arrive not for an Airbnb, but actually to have another life, we suddenly wonder, can we handle this? And suddenly Rotterdam is no longer a city of the world. So the question of support presumes that we already know how a city such as Rotterdam should be organized. Only then does it make sense to determine how many people we can handle. Only if we assume the city in some kind of finished state can we know what too much means. But when we realize that Syria or Afghanistan or Nigeria are not on another planet, but are in fact already part of our world, what matters is not support, or our draagvlak in Dutch, but how cities should actually be organized in a world in which not only goods and money and consumers circulate, but also people in search of refuge and in search of another life. So the question of support, draagvlak again, freezes in a way our imagination of what a city is or could be, and the arrival of refugees can only appear as a kind of burden that has to be endured, not as an event, as an opportunity in which city life can be reimagined. So nowhere is this imagination of what a city could be more deeply frozen, I would say, than among the men in our city council, because they're all men. They have simply assimilated this question of the arrival of refugees in their already unchanging idea of what the city should be, namely that everybody should be self-reliant. And of course, if you really think of it, this idea of self-reliance is completely empty. It's an empty notion which hardly means anything and has to hide the fact that the city council has hardly an idea of what the city could or should be in a migratory world. So what does self-reliance mean to city dwellers? It's completely vague. What it means to the city council is quite clear, by the way. They don't want people in welfare. That's basically what they mean. And they want to push people as much as possible onto the labor market so that employers can take advantage of the fact that people are desperate. So no wonder that many Rotterdammers who are already living here, by the way, strongly resisted and still strongly resist the hosting of refugees. We have also all seen this, because for many years already, self-reliance has also been demanded of them. So to them, all of the emergency resources for refugees can be nothing other than foul play. So they strongly resist this, of course. And if we are really so concerned, as we apparently are, about popular support for hosting of refugees, we should worry, in fact, I think, about the image of the city that is presented constantly to people. So those who preach self-reliance as an ideal for city life shouldn't be so surprised that citizens will eventually start acting accordingly. So I would say, as a sociologist trying to think about these things, let's not waste our time worrying too much about this question of support. And instead, let's ask how mobility of refugees, in this case, but also of other people, changes the way that cities are constructed and organized, and changes the way that people make their lives in cities. The arrival of refugees creates, in all kinds of different ways, possibilities, in fact, strongly needed possibilities, I would say, to reorganize cities and to reimagine what cities could be. This is what really matters, not support. Our city council is not aware of this, of course, but people are actually in the real world inventing ways to live together in cities and not being self-reliant at all. So this is what I want to research, and I think this is really a worthwhile question for social scientists to work on, and I'm very happy that I have some time and money to do precisely this. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Rogier. I have one question, because this is a theoretical story. The anger is present. The refugees that are seeking a place to live are real. Yeah. And you are kind of saying, okay, we cannot say this is too much, but you would say 500,000 Syrian refugees in Rotterdam will be too much, right?
Well, I mean, let's not kid ourselves that something like that would be highly disruptive, right? But the very fact that we feel it's to be so problematic that the real world somehow intervenes into our lives of you know, more or less predictable consumption and our more or less predictable city life as consumers and citizens. The very idea that the way that we live would be suddenly massively changed by the fact that the world is a nasty, violent place, and that we feel so abhorrent about that makes it okay for us to close borders and violently exclude people from our territory, that should really bother us. Okay. So that's what I'm trying to push here. And of course, nobody's talking about, like, let everybody in, because that won't happen. The interesting thing, let me say one more thing. The interesting thing that happened during 2014, 15, 16 is that we have now material proof that even if you push people into the most desperate forms of travel, they will come to Europe. So the whole agenda of closing borders is bankrupt. It's over. And the administrators know it. They're just repackaging that in terms of calling it a refugee crisis.
There is some hope. We were talking about the United States elections, but the Dutch parliamentary elections are coming up in March 2017. There is some hope that there will be a new liaison, a big left-wing power mobilized. Are you? I would say you are. Would be.
I'm left-wing. Yes.
You would. Yeah. That's obvious, right? But do you think this will happen as well, or?
Let's take the Netherlands. I don't think it will happen in the Netherlands. The left is severely badly organized in the left, in the Netherlands. The fact that it's kind of happened in America, I think, also, I mean, has to do with a lot of things, but also with the fact that
the popularity of Bernie Sanders.
Well,
you mean,
yeah,
right?
exactly. That's what I'm referring to. I mean, social democracy as a political idea, precisely because there hasn't been a social democratic party in the US, isn't bogged down by a history of actual social democratic government. That is completely different in the Netherlands. So the Social Democratic Party in the Netherlands, the SP, can make all kinds of offers to the public, but everybody will naturally associate that with actually existing social democracy, the PvdA. So that muddies the waters of leftist politics immensely, and that is a problem that Bernie Sanders doesn't have. He can appear somehow completely fresh, untouched, something completely new, and that's impossible in the Netherlands for the left.
Okay, thanks. Rogier van Reekum.